Dr. Jazz.
Border here.
Dr.
Where are you? Are you still in Portland on the West Coast or no?
No, I'm in. I live for the last 11 years. We've lived in Arivaca, Arizona.
Arizona. Oh, wow. Okay. Amazing. Desert.
So right down south,
Wow.
and the sun is always shining, and there's very little water. And we have to drive a little ways before we see the wall here, but it's here.
Wow. That's scary. Yeah. I will not even touch that sector of
No, we don't need it.
oh man, it's crazy. It's insane. But yeah. I will go to nicer things like music and what you've done, and I mean that's why the reason we're talking. So, and,
Well, the good thing is that just 3 weeks ago, Charles Lloyd played in Tucson.
wow, man.
And there's a woman living in our town here who's from New Orleans, and she's a cousin of Charles. And so we took her and we went and saw a wonderful concert
Wow.
that he did. And so that was a good thing.
Yeah. He's still doing it. Yeah, I saw him last year in Vienna, and amazing. Yeah, I mean,
He made a record years ago called Of Course, with Ron Carter and Tony Williams.
mm,
And I know when he hired them to play with him for a week, he and Gabor Szabo.
oh yeah, man, I love Gabor. Yeah,
And Miles came to the concert and said, "You son of a bitch, you stole my you stole my rhythm section."
yeah.
But it was a wonderful, wonderful album, and really turned me. I had worked with Chico Hamilton a little bit myself, and Charles had done stuff with him. So
Yeah. Of course, he started with Chico actually, right? I think.
yeah,
Way back. Yeah.
way back. Yeah,
Way
that
back.
was. He's 3 years older than I am. So
Ah, okay. So we're kind of the same, yeah, generation.
yeah, just about.
Yeah. I wanted to start this talk speaking of legends. I listened to, I'm a huge Oregon fan, obviously, and I played a lot with Paul McCandless through the years, the last, from like 2015 to 2020, we played really a lot. And I listened to Together today, and speaking of legends, you as a bass player, how was it with Elvin? I mean, because I listened to what you do on the bass with him, and it's just like, man, it's. Can you tell me how that was? I mean,
well, that at that period of time, Oregon was recording for Vanguard, and Elvin was also recording for Vanguard. And somebody played him a bit of an organ record, and he said, "Wow, I can hear me in there."
what? Really? Oh, wow.
Because Colin was playing tablas and percussion. He said, "You don't even have a drummer, you have a great percussionist." And so he said he'd be happy to do an album with us.
Wow.
So at that time, Elvin was working with his own trio or quartet with either Jan Hammer or Chick Corea playing drums or playing piano, so they could listen, so they could be able to play with Elvin. And so I started going to their gigs and with a metronome, and I checked out the tunes that Elvin seemed to be most comfortable with and the tempos. And then I went back to the band and I said, "Okay, these are the tempos, and here's, bits of this and bits of that." So Ralph wrote a couple of pieces and I had a piece. And we got together and in the Vanguard studio, which we had signed with Vanguard because they would let us have the studio.
Yeah.
We didn't have to have a producer. Long story, but we got it worked out so the head of the company realized that we could produce ourselves. So we started playing, and Elvin was like very kind of cautious because we're playing acoustically in a large room and we're spread out a bit. But at first we had drums in in the guitar mic and in the piano mic and in the tabla mic as well. So we had to switch around so we could get everything going. And then once we started to get going, Elvin, after a couple of tunes, I had recorded with Elvin before with Paul Bley and Annette Peacock.
Oh yeah,
and,
exactly. Yeah.
And after 2 or 3 tunes, he would take his shirt off, wring the water out of it, and put it away and grab a new T-shirt to play in and go on because he could not play the way he played without sweating. So after a couple of tunes, he said to Colin, what if we went around and got a drink? So they went around the corner. We're on 23rd Street and near 7th Avenue. And they went and got something to drink. Then he set up, came back, but then he played about twice as loud. So we did more moving away and getting the earphones just so. And then we took off and just played right, boom, 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 boom. And the whole record was done in about, 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Incredible.
And it was, and when we went to get our picture taken for that, you'll notice the cover of that album has got our picture and a little cameo of his.
Yeah.
Because when he got downstairs, it was on the photographer was on the 7th floor of this building. When he got down there, he had a heart attack.
Oh shit. In
the lobby. And so did not show up for the picture. And the next day we got a call that said, sorry, I'm in the hospital. So for the next, he was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. And I started visiting him and taking him CDs in those days, or not CDs, cassettes.
Oh yeah.
Taking him cassettes of Benny Wallace, of friends of mine that I was playing with that he hadn't heard. So we became, I got to hang out some with him, and that was it was wonderful. So,
well,
it was so wonderful. The first time I had played with him in the studio for this Annette Peacock record, I was still playing the bass with the French bow, which is held overhand. You put your fingers on top of it. It's held the way a violin or a cello is played. And I found that when I was supposed to play a solo, bow solo, on this Annette piece, and I couldn't even hear myself. I was standing right next to his hi-hat. Just hi-hat's like where I usually put the mic. He's right there, so he can hear me. But I realized that I couldn't put enough weight on my arm. I'd never tried to bow with Elvin Jones. So when I left there, I called Miroslav Vitus and asked him if I could borrow a German bow from him, because the German bow is held with a thumb on top, and your weight, you have a lot more weight of the arm to go on it. So that very day, that recording made me change the bow I was using to a different kind of bow. So it had a big effect on me. It was really
interesting. Yeah.
So that's a happy, wonderful album. And
yeah. It's beautiful. Because he was such a loud drummer. Also, that's why I'm asking you. You know, and, but it seemed to work with you.
But
that's beautiful.
He did such a good job of listening. He could hear with the earphones. He could hear what was going on, and he was just. We took. There's a piece on there that Paul and I do. It's a duet with Elvin. It was kind of a bowing toward what was Richard Davis, who did bass clarinet and bass. I think it was who was it?
Richard Davis and Dolphy.
Oh, Eric Dolphy.
Eric Dolphy, yeah.
So they played that. So we took the tones of his snare drum and the tone of the bass drum. And Paul, who's just one of the greatest bass clarinet players ever. So we took those two tones and we made a piece out of those. We played a free piece using those as the, big binding.
Yeah.
And I think it was maybe it was a low D and I think a B and a low D. And let me see, when we did that record, by that time I'm not sure which tuning I had then. I think by that time I had a high C and maybe I had the low C already too. That was, I had to change my tuning around because Colin with Oregon, Colin was playing the tablas and the tabla drums were tuned to D and C sharp, those two tones. And then they had a second tone on each of those drums was a whole step higher. So when we had pieces, Ralph would write pieces oftentimes for the sitar. We were almost always, because the sitar was in D.
Yeah. So
we would end up cadencing lots of times, even in a free piece, in a non-written piece, with the D at least, or a C sharp. But because my bass was, I was still tuned in fourths when we started out. I just had a low E, and I tried tuning it down to a D, but it made it so flappy.
Yeah.
It didn't sound. And then that string, I would have to play higher on that string, and none of the notes sounded good. So I eventually heard this story that Red Mitchell had this fifth tuning. And Red was in the days when he was still in LA before he moved to Europe. He was like a first call guy for any kind of recordings, TV. Then was so he got a call one day from a fellow. He had a recording session with Henry Mancini for the music for Peter Gunn, which was a TV show from way back there in the 50s. And he got a call the night before from the guy that had booked him for that as part of the band for this, and said, "You've got to stop at the music store because Mancini is a classical composer, and he's read in his book, in his orchestration book, that the bass can play down to a low C, which guys with a 5-string instrument would tune a low B, which meant that they could play that C. So you've got to go and get a low C string because they have one of those, and because Henry's written this whole set. One of the things they had to play was written in C entirely and written for low C. So that's what started him on that, eventually changing his whole tuning to fifths when he got to Europe. So I had to make that. I didn't at the time. I didn't know that, but I went ahead and changed that string, and then eventually, because the band played many times opposite Gary Burton, and with Eberhard Weber playing. So they had two bassists, Steve Swallow and Eberhard. And Eberhard sounded so beautiful on the high C that eventually I put on the high C as well, because it was such a great sound. So I ended up with a low C and then A, D, and a high C completely. And all my friends told me I was crazy to do that, because it meant I lost all my habits from the other tuning. But since I moved to Arizona, I quit playing with organ before I came down here, and I went ahead and changed to fifths tuning when I got down here, because I'm no longer responsible for the music that I'd written before.
Yeah. No, but that's why what made you guys sound. I mean, the way each one of you played, right? I mean, it's you guys. I mean, what you play on the bass, it's so much part of the sound of the group, because
we were into it. I spent some, when I changed that tuning, I was working with the saxophonist Benny Wallace.
Oh, really? You played with Benny? Wow, I didn't know that.
And Benny and I lived in the same building for a minute, and on Thompson Street, and he had a gig in a club that was up just a few blocks away from there. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, I have this gig, which could be a duo gig. And if I came by and rolled your amp up the street 5 blocks, would you play with me?" He said, "It's a great gig. It pays $1 and you get a free beer." So about the second or third week of that gig, why Benny was taking all of my songs, learning them, and then just like taking them apart. So I got the low C, and so he was able to figure out things for me to put, bass lines for me to play using that. So we had a fantastic time. We would get together and we would disembowel the songs that we're playing. He's a wonderful player. We speak several times a year.
Oh, really? He's one of the most underrated guys, man. Really, it's such a sound.
He's a monster, just a monster player, and we had a good time.
Absolutely, yeah. Glenn, you mentioned your tunes. I wanted to ask you, when did I know your tunes like Pepe Linque and Ariana, all that stuff. And when did you start writing? And what was your writing process? Because your tunes are, when I listen, let's say, to the organ repertoire, each one of you guys wrote. I mean, it's a unity, but still, you have your own unique writing styles. Like, when did you start writing, and what was your process usually?
Well, the process was pretty much, I think the songs on maybe not our first record, that was way back there, but when we actually began to perform a lot and preparing for the first Vanguard album, the things I was doing on the bass, it was still fourths tuning. Ralph and I had already been playing since, we started recording in 1972 was the first Vanguard record, Music of Another Present Era. Yeah. But Ralph and I had met in 1959.
Really?
We had met at the University of Oregon. And he was playing trumpet and piano then. And we played in a combo contest. I played with 3 of the 5 groups that were in the combo contest, because the only guy who was really a professional player in the town of Eugene was was working 6 nights a week, and he could not take any nights off to play in a combo contest for Parents Weekend in January of 1960. So that was the first thing that Ralph and I did. And soon thereafter, we started listening to Bill Evans and Scott LaFaro. And because by the time I heard those 2 records with well, I guess it was only 2. No, there was 3 records. By the time we heard those, LaFaro was already dead. And so we started playing everything using the way that LaFaro conceived of the bass part, which was playing very open and playing melodic responses. And so I worked with my technique to have more of a guitar technique on the bass than a bass technique necessarily. And because Brazilian music, when Ralph came back he went to Vienna to study the guitar. And when he returned, he met a kid on the boat who was a Brazilian who was playing bossa nova on the guitar when he wasn't working, and Ralph heard this. And really this was the first time he went to Vienna, and then in 1963 he went to Vienna. No, he was gone. He was gone when Kennedy died. It must have been 1964. And so then he went again in 1968. And by that time, it was the first time he heard the Brazilian kid play. Then we both moved to Seattle, where there was a great club called the Penthouse that had Miles, Bill Evans. By this time, Bill Evans, it was Eddie Gomez's second gig with Bill Evans.
Wow.
It was so fantastic. So we were able to hear the best people. And there was a Saturday afternoon jam session at the club where sometimes some of the guys who were working there that week would come and sit in to thrill everybody with. And he and I got a gig playing in those jam sessions with whoever was in town, which that's the first time I heard Tony Williams was there. Oh, wow.
Amazing. Yeah, I can imagine.
And everyone, great players. And Herbie Hancock, he was really positive and encouraging. And it's great. But anyway, the technique and for my early compositions were ones where I took the fingerings that I was using and the plucking that I was using from the guitar and just applied it to, it was awkward and not nearly as clean and beautiful, but I had that guitar in my ear when I composed the song Three Step Dance was one of them, and Oh, there was another piece. There was a piece that I wrote that I did as a duet with Colin, because a friend of mine, a violinist, a young violinist, died in an auto accident. And I used to go up and play in Albany, New York with Nick Brignola.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
You did the
people
record
from,
together, right, with Nick? I think
yes,
even. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, with Ted Curson,
Yeah, yeah.
Dick Burke, and yeah, that was a great record, fun record. But this girl who would come to hear us play there was a violinist, and she was doing trying to figure out a show with a lady who was a singer, and they were taking a Yeats play
Well,
and making something with this. So when this girl died in an auto accident, I had the book of the Yeats plays, and what is the title of that piece? It's Hearts, The Land of Heart's Desire was a play that Yeats wrote. So the song that I wrote was for this person, dedicated to her, and then there was another song that I'd written that was called, let me see, Deer Path. Deer Path.
yeah.
That came from that was a piano song. And so was Land of Heart's Desire. Land of Heart's Desire was bass and sitar, I think. Colin and I did that one. So, I mean, the things at the time, I was working with Tim Hardin.
Oh, yeah.
I played in, actually, yeah, I played at Woodstock with Tim Hardin.
Really? Oh, man. Okay. Shit.
Yeah. And
Crazy.
so did Ralph. Tim, when I got to New York, I met a great flute player, Jeremy Steig.
Steig. Oh, yeah, I have that record. Yeah, yeah. I have that with Warren Bernhardt, right, on piano.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's a nice record.
Jeremy had a band called Jeremy and the Satyrs, and Warren Bernhardt was the piano player who played with him. And I met Warren at a jam session, and Jeremy had introduced, somehow maybe Jeremy introduced us. And well, the very first thing that happened when I got to New York was that I played with a man who had quit playing the bass, but he was playing piano then. His name was James Stevenson. And James had been writing, and in the first jam session I played with just somebody in the neighborhood uptown. He heard me play and he said, "You're Paul Bley's next bass player."
That's how you got the gig, actually.
And so he said, "Come on." And we went downtown after we played a while, and he took me to Paul Bley's house, and we knocked on the door, and Paul didn't answer the door. So it didn't happen then, but very shortly after that, it did happen, and I ended up getting invited by Barry Altschul, who was his drummer at that time, to go and start rehearsing with him. And I got there the day that he had just gotten the first Moog synthesizer. So we proceeded to rehearse and eventually do a concert, and some of the recording with of Annette's music was her recording called "I'm the One," and we did a trio album as well with Steve Haas, the drummer from.
Yeah.
So let me see. I interrupted myself there.
But that must have been a crazy band, right, with Paul? I mean,
Oh yeah, it was a crazy band.
yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
I got to play a lot with Steig, and actually a lot of the work that I got in New York came because Steig grew up in New York, and so did Eddie Gomez. And they were best buddies at the High School of Music and Art in New York. And because by this time, 66, Eddie was already playing with Bill, and Eddie worked in town when Bill wasn't playing. They would go out for a couple of weeks and he'd come back. So Eddie had gigs that he would accept in town, and then he'd have to find a substitute whenever Bill called and said, "Hey, meet me in wherever." So I ended up getting a call from Zoot Sims.
Wow.
Or no, for Zoot Sims' band, and probably I don't remember who the call came from, but I ended up. The band was actually led by Jake Hanna, who was a drummer with Count Basie. Yes, drummer with Count Basie's band. So, or Woody. Anyway. So I ended up going to this gig and playing, and after the first set, why Jake said, "Look, your time's great, man. You can have a solo on every piece."
Oh wow, oh, man, okay.
So I ended up working in that gig for 5 weeks, which was fantastic because everybody, whoever was in town, would come in to sit in. It was a raucous thing.
Amazing.
Pretty wonderful. But Deer Path, yeah. So I ended up writing Deer Path while I was waiting for Tim Harden to show up for a rehearsal for something. I wrote it on a piano in his house. I didn't have a good piano in those days. But so yeah, each of those pieces I was already working with Bley. I had already played with Elvin. I had played Jan Hammer, and Jeremy Steig and I used to get together and do these get together to play. Jan by this time is in the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Sure.
And but he treats it like he's a wonderful piano player, and he was a great drummer.
Oh.
And yeah, really great drummer. He's my record introducing Glen Moore. Do you know that record?
Yeah.
Yeah, Hammer's the drummer on there.
Really, I was never aware of that. Really, wow, I have to re-listen. Yeah,
so
the
we
director one. Yeah, okay.
We were good friends, and Jan would treat us like we would. He'd come by my house with his little Volkswagen Squareback and pick me up, and we would go to a great studio that was filled with drums, electric pianos, acoustic pianos, everything. And we'd play 2 or 3 songs in duple meter, and then some jazz songs, and stop and take a breath. And it was like going to the gym.
Sure.
It was like you hit this thing, different tempos. So we do these things, whatever needed to be. And then we had some great gigs. We played at the Garden at the Museum of Modern Art. We played some really nice gigs with that trio. So I had a lot of different influences then, and boy, everybody, when the Mahavishnu happened, Oh, it knocked everybody's socks off, and everybody was learning that music or some how to just take it in because Jan already John came to work with Tony, came to New York from London, and he ended up recording with Miles, but really he was there with Tony, and of course Miles was paying a lot of attention to Tony because Tony he'd given he'd given the great gig to Tony already before he had his own group. And so let me see, where am I going with this? So
probably, yeah, your experience like at that time.
So Hammer, everybody is copying what's going on. This was the thing. The music that John was writing at that time and playing with Tony, when Hammer came and heard that music and wanted to rehearse it and put it together, Hammer rewrote virtually everything.
Wow.
John was playing something, they playing the parts of the piece. Here's the parts. Here's the melody. Here's the blowing. And Hammer would say, no, that's not the melody. That's the bass line. The melody is this other thing you have. And he just took the parts that John already had and rearranged them. I mean, he was like a mad scientist when it came to hearing possibility. And so it was a skill that Jan really had, and it meant actually when the first record came out and John thanked not Jan Hammer, but his guru for inspiring the music. So that's why Jan was only there for a little while, because eventually he quit because he couldn't stand. It meant if the publishing, literally, I think publishing money went to the guru rather than.
That's insane.
So this was, now, maybe I don't have this correct. It's so long that I have to beg if I'm misrepresenting anything here. This is just what I remember. It's my brain. So yeah, I had a lot of influences in this music, and certainly LaFaro was a big one.
Yeah, I hear
the bassist that I had listened to the most from the time I really started playing seriously at the University of Oregon, I got to play with a great piano player. The same time I was playing with Ralph, I was playing with a piano player who was a classical genius of a player, but he had bad eyes. He was from New England, and he came as a graduate student to the University of Oregon, and he taught in the English department. That's the graduate students teach and help. And so when he was at a point in his life before he ever arrived there, he was learning. He got as far as Chopin, in Chopin's music, the etudes, all this like, here are all these musical problems, and here's what to do. They're just brilliant. Well, because his eyes were bad, he began listening to some jazz music. Here was music that he could hear what was going on. He had perfect pitch. So he put the record player on top of the grand piano in his home and started playing these jazz trio albums by, at this point in the early 50s, early 50s, all these, the piano trio became an incredible, pool of wonderful piano players, piano, bass, and drums, and all kinds of different. So this guy had collected all of these people, and when he was the other person I played with in that combo contest. When he started working, he sent me home with some Oscar Peterson records and said, "Here, learn how to do this." And Ray was incredible. I listened to him, and eventually met him and played his bass.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
We got to hang out some, and several times. So I had that music that I listened to, and this pianist had learned all that, and Oscar Peterson was his favorite guy, so I had to be his Ray Brown. So all through college, really, I was in college studying literature and history.
Really?
But my real study was Ray Brown with Oscar Peterson, and I got to hear him actually in that time too, live in Portland. So,
Incredible.
yeah, great.
Incredible.
Anyway, I'm blah blah blahing.
No, that's why we're here. I love listening.
If you have more questions, more.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned Mahavishnu, and I've talked with Paul about that many times when we were touring. But you had Miles loud, electric. You have Tony Williams loud.
Yeah.
You have all these fusion bands, and then there is you on the other side, this acoustic lineup. What was, how did you fit in? Like, how is your view? Like, because you were still, what Paul told me, like, you were really huge in a way in the 70s, and kind of a counterpoint to what was happening in traditional jazz and in, this fusion stuff. Yet you were also in a way fusion. Like, how was it for you? Like, how did you experience all that and that story in the 70s, especially?
Well, I think the thing that we had to do when I started playing with Jeremy Steig, one of the things that he did was that he would go to WBAI in New York. And there was a guy, oh boy, I should remember his name. There was a fellow who had a radio show from midnight to 6 a.m., Bob Fass. And Jeremy would go there with whoever he just played with or something and play all night on this show.
Oh.
So he invited me. He said, "Come on, here we go. Let's go and do this." So we went and we played. And then I think maybe Colin came and played, and for a night or two. And eventually, all the members of Oregon, we ended up showing up there. But early on, I didn't know. I met Colin just the summer before. Summer, just before I went to Woodstock with Tim. And then after we played the first night at Woodstock, and we had a gig the next night in New York, so we had to be flown out in a military helicopter. We'd come in a little helicopter the day before from where we were parked, but we had to be flown out by military and then drive into New York City and play for a concert that had virtually no audience, but it was Ian and Sylvia and Tim Hardin's band. And we had not played at all well at Woodstock. The sound was funny. Then Tim was somewhere else. And it didn't work. We'd been rehearsing all summer long. But it was a conflicted band. Tim had another guitar player playing, And I had offered to go ahead and play with Tim for this Woodstock thing if Ralph could come in, because Ralph had just come to New York by the summer of or winter, late February or March of '69. And he didn't have any gigs, and so he worked a couple of gigs with Tim, and then Tim invited him to come and play there. So in that summer, I had met Colin, and I was pretty excited to meet him because he was such a fantastic musician. He had already been studying with Ravi Shankar, and he immediately influenced a lot of the things that I did on the bass, because he had all these sitar exercises, and he already played the violin and the guitar, and he studied the tabla with Ravi's tabla player. Yeah. So, and oh boy, he was incredible. He was a great influence. I played with him at this jam session. And then when we came back, the thing with Tim, we played at Woodstock, and there was very little money paid for that performance, but we were promised that we would get to do a recording the next week. So we went and played opposite Ian and Sylvia the night after Woodstock. We played all of Tim's music flawlessly. There was no audience. But we got to hear Ian and Sylvia. That was fantastic. And we got to have the experience. But then, so we were to meet in the studio on Monday morning after this Woodstock and the New York concert. And the drummer did not show up at the studio. And so we started calling around. We called Ayrton, and somehow I think I must have called Colin, otherwise he wouldn't have found out. But a rumor spread over New York, and all of a sudden drummers started showing up because here was a record date. But as it turned out, I'd been touring with Tim for a couple of years at that point. And his managers, as he was to go, were in Columbia Studios to make a record called Bird on a Wire. Bird on a Wire.
Yeah.
So there we were to make this record, but I think that same day between the time we played with Tim, his managers sued him for the money, their percentage of the gigs that we've been working with him for several years, and his wife sued him for divorce. So Tim did not show up even that first day, while the drummers are all trying to get in. And so, okay, so there we are. So eventually, late in the morning, Ayrton calls and said, oh, he can't make it, but if we need him, he can do it. So Colin comes. He has his sitar and his tabla. We're just sitting around, and I think Ralph did what he always did, which he'd find a quiet place and practice. So he went into the stairwell outside the studio and started playing the guitar. Colin took his sitar and went in and sat down, and they began playing the guitar and the sitar together. It was like, oh my God, what a sound. So when eventually later, this is like September or late August, early September. So by the end of the week, the cellist who was in that group had been working with the Winter Consort, Richard Bach was his name, and he had been in the band playing at Woodstock as well. So he told Paul McCandless about Ralph's playing and mine and Colin's. And by the end of the week, Paul had come and heard us and reported back to Paul Winter who had a 50 concert tour starting in January of 1970. And so pretty soon we all got calls and ended up going, getting our pictures taken and starting to look through this music. And so in the middle of January, we started this, and Paul Winter was reforming the band. He had had a guy who played, I don't know if he played oud at all or whether it was just, he played music from the Renaissance time somehow on the guitar. And so Paul had ideas of these things, but he wanted to hear the 12-string guitar. And so he went to Guild. I think they were in New York. I don't know where they were. Right, he would have gone wherever they were. He went into the Guild shop and he asked if they had any 12-string guitars. But he had asked Ralph, I guess, if he could play the 12-string guitar. And Ralph was, well, I suppose. And so he's standing there saying, well, do you have a 12-string guitar, but one that has a classical neck on it? The neck would be wider to match for plucking and not just playing with a pick. He said, as a matter of fact, what was his name? Some guitarist had commissioned a guitar like that. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name now, but it'll come floating to the top of my aging brain. So Arlo Guthrie?
Maybe, yeah.
No, somebody else. But I'll think of it. So Paul Winter showed up for our first rehearsal with a 12-string guitar and handed it to Ralph. And at that point, everybody had been listening to Joni Mitchell, who was playing her different tunings on the on her instruments, and so we were pretty heavily influenced by that. Every once in a while, we'd play. I remember Dave Holland and I, by this time, were good friends, and we're hanging out a lot and doing a lot of playing together. We're both eating macrobiotically and sharing a lot of meals, doing a lot of cooking together, and trying Joni Mitchell songs and all sorts of things. So Ralph proceeded to go to his room and check this thing out. And I think within a week or so, he had written Icarus, maybe even sooner than that, on this instrument. And the music that Paul was playing, the music that he had planned to play on this tour was, different folk songs and things. And Paul was not a writer. And Ralph was a composition student at the University of Oregon. He had figured out the mechanics of all the Brazilian music, how that went and how the guitar just played into that. And with Bill Evans and Scott LaFaro's playing, he was as a writer, he was primed. He was already. So what happened over the length of this tour, this 50 concert tour, is that Ralph came up with these songs we found David Darling, who was playing the cello then. And because a week into it, the cellist who was to have been on the tour got invited to play in the Rachmaninoff string competition in Russia. And so he had to stop after a week and practice, and Ralph came, David Darling came and took his place. So all this stuff is going on. So Ralph ends up writing, beginning with Icarus, to write pieces that the consort could play. And it sort of replaced all the, so we spent a week in Florida rehearsing new pieces. And Paul had a piece that he did every night with every band he'd ever had, where it's like he would turn off the lights on the stage and the band would make up an improvisation.
That's how this started. Okay, interesting.
So we started doing these pieces, and Paul gave us specific instructions. You can play it like this scale, but just play different notes. It's like he had never had really improvising players play with him. So in the course of the next week, we started recording. We recorded every single concert, and every night we listened back to every single concert of what exactly had been done. And these free pieces started to turn into, well, David Darling had this thing. He did a solo piece for a friend of his who died in Vietnam. And it had him screaming in terror and playing with some kind of electric box that would, amplify it and add to it. So we started playing these free pieces where eventually David would get to the screaming stage. So we would do a thing where if it looked like the scream was going to start, we'd start doing something else to keep that from happening yet. And so a whole thing, the evolution of the playing was a very real thing. I was playing the flute, which I had played with Steig. I played enough with him so that I picked up a lot of what he was doing and how the air. He taught me how to breathe, really, for that, because I'd been playing with my fingers and it was something else. So by the end of that tour, we were able to get David Green, who eventually became our engineer, and Phil Ramone recorded Icarus. We all came back after that tour and recorded that. So we were recording live things everywhere. In fact, we recorded in Arizona. Frank Lloyd Wright did a Arizona concert hall. I forget which one it is, or what it's called, but it's up there. He hung out and made his Western setup be in Arizona. So, and David Green recorded that, and the concert we did in upstate New York, where somebody came up to Ralph and I before the concert and said that they knew that they were at a concert where the first time that Scotty LaFaro ever played the bass, there was nobody playing the bass. He was playing clarinet, and he ended up picking up a bass. And that was like the beginning of his playing. And he came and told us, and we didn't even know why. I don't know that he knew why, except that we were in the band, and he wanted to let us know that Scotty was from that area. But David Green recorded that concert, and I think there was another concert too. Anyway, soon in the course of that 50 concerts. We drove 25,000 miles. It was like we went around the world.
Insane.
You know, we put 25,000 miles on a Ford station wagon. And the four of us started gravitating after the concert to playing and hanging out and doing things that we weren't doing exactly with Paul on the stage, but we got to know each other better and better and tried all sorts of things. So that by the time we got to LA on that trip, while we stopped everywhere we went, practically everywhere we went, out of 25 concerts. Colin knew someone who was there, who'd gone to school. He had gone to Yale. He'd gone to a special high school, some private school in New England. His parents were from New England. And he had gone to Yale, and then he went to Indiana and studied after a year or two at Yale, he went to Indiana and studied with the best orchestral percussionist teacher in the world, George Gaber. I think that's the name. I think. So, and then Colin went to LA to take advanced study, I guess at UCLA, on other kinds of music, Indian music more than Western music. And he went to a party as soon as he got there with other students in this ethnomusicology thing. There was some kind of party for Rabih. Rabih was there. And Rabih was supposed to catch a plane. And he was suddenly panicking that he was going to be late for this flight. And by this time, whoever was having this party knew Colin well enough to know that Colin was an excellent driver. He had this, on those 50 concerts, he would find the stage door to a place where we just had the name of the town we were going to play in, and there was a university, and there was, so said to Rabih, look, I have a friend, he can drive you. So however the car was arranged or whatever, Rabih drove him through the streets of LA and found, he'd only been there a little while, but he knew how to find it. So when Rabih came back from that tour, he asked whoever this person was who had this party, where's that young man? Bring me that young man. So in the course of the next year, Colin became sort of road manager for Rabih, started taking lessons from Rabih and from Alda Raka, and got experience hooking up, placing the mics for this thing, listening to it, deciding how it should be mic'd, how it should be mixed. And soon he's understanding the nuts and bolts of what happens in a performance of these instruments. So by the time we finally met him and he was there with the winter consort, he knew what to do. So when we finally got our record deal with Vanguard, he had a good idea of what mics worked and what wouldn't, and how we could set up, how we could use the reverb or not, and how the whole thing could go. So he had all this experience. And well, to tell the story again, but when we were finally able to record and asked by Vanguard Records to record us, the fellow who was the president of Vanguard had us to his office to sign this contract. And in the course of this, he said, well, of course, this is wonderful. You guys, this is interesting. He was listening to us. He said, you're going to need a producer. which could be the kiss of death, and Colin, having already all this experience with the just new experience of recording and understanding more, said, well, would you, it turned out Maynard Solomon, this man was a like a Mozart scholar. He wrote books about classical music. And so Colin said, well, would you agree to be our producer to this man? And he's like, well, I'd be delighted. Colin said the right thing. So, okay, we go to the studio and we play a piece that by this time we've been doing quite a bit of performance, and we'll do these pieces like the Paul Winter piece, but we'll start the night with that. And it's to find out how all the instruments sound, because each of us is playing several instruments on stage. How does it sound? Can you hear everything? Does it work? So we'd go out and play a piece that was completely free improvisation, not a word about where or when. Maybe talk about what instruments we'd start on, but nothing about when something else would happen. So we play this piece. We're so excited. We're playing along, and very soon, like quickly, like just a couple minutes into it, we find this ending. And so we stop, and then we start again, and we play more. So when we go on to listen to this, Maynard says, oh, boys, we listened to it. He said, that was wonderful. He said, can you do that again, but don't stop? And we said, never. We could never do that again. Well, by the end of the night, he said, boys, I don't think you need a producer. You've got it. So thereafter, we made 7 records, and we were in charge of whatever happened. And if there were decisions to be made, it wasn't some person saying, well, I think, all that. So, so we brought a lot of different things to the circumstance of being a band. And it was, at first, I mean, some people would like kind of make fun of us, or it was, I remember Joe Zawinul saying, you're a little band. I heard you're a little band, but because Weather Report is starting right then. But Alphonse Mouzon, who's playing with Larry Coryell for a while,
exactly.
He started coming to our concerts. Guys who were heavy, great players were like, whoa, what are you guys doing? What is it? Because it had the influences that we had, but we couldn't. Ralph and I had done a lot of jazz playing.
Yep.
But we really couldn't play jazz with Paul and Colin. It was like, it's a different time since. If we started playing just a standard, we'd lose them. They wouldn't even, because the time feel
different,
of the jazz stuff with that triplet kind of feel and swinging and playing off of that. Well, they couldn't hear what's going on. And so it took them several years actually before we could start to play. So in the meantime, Ralph's composition thing would, we'd play a free piece and he'd hear a combination of 2 instruments, that maybe me playing the flute with the bass clarinet or something that not maybe the primary instruments, but he'd hear these sounds of the combination of things. He'd just sit down and write a piece.
Okay.
So we had like Mozart in the band. And he immediately would find things, and he's playing 5 or 6 instruments, and he's finding things to do on all those. He's playing the trumpet and the French horn and the piano, and Colin takes up the clarinet and gets really good at the clarinet. McCandless played everything because his parents were music teachers, and his parents made him learn every instrument. So he was like, he could do anything. It's just pretty astonishing. So at first, when we started performing, I mean, we found out that, okay, we're playing this with these funny instruments, and Colin's sitting on the floor, and lots of the clubs we play, and you couldn't even see him if you're sitting in the audience and around it. You can't even tell. So we have to be able to play with enough oomph that the place is starting to move. I mean, there's no way around that. We can play something beautiful, but don't take too much time because we're drinking. And we came to, sex and drugs and rock and roll. And everybody else is playing with electronic instruments. Even Miles, at this point, he's more and more. There's so much as, music is moving on. So we had to get strong enough with the time and with melodies and with like startling things. And Ralph wrote all kinds of amazing pieces, and most of all, some just grand things with the piano that just year after year after year, with every record we did, here was another amazing piano piece that just went all over the place. And meanwhile, we're getting to play, by the at the same time that we recorded with Vanguard, we did a record with Manfred Eicher. Called Trios and Solos.
Yeah, exactly. 72.
It's called Trios and Solos because we had the Oregon Quartet had an agreement with Vanguard, and Manfred wanted to record us, and everybody was recording with Manfred. Everybody who he asked would say, absolutely. So we ended up doing a tour in Europe. First of all, we made the Trios and Solos record. And so it was kind of a little bit awkward, but we figured it out that we didn't play all of us at once, never more than 3. So Vanguard ended up suing us for doing that.
Really? Oh,
man. But the deal was that once we went to Europe, when we got to Europe, we listened to Jan Garbarek's band with Paulie Danielson and Bobo Stinson, a great piano player.
Amazing player.
Oh, just Jon Christensen. Just this amazing band. We got to play right with them. And we got to listen to Art Landy's Red Lanta.
Oh, man, yeah.
Which was just a bunch of Art songs and we heard so much. It influenced how Ralph started writing for the horn and the piano, because Art Landy's still to this day
amazing guy. Yeah.
Just amazing, a great composer, and he was a good friend of Paul's from the beginning, and he recorded with Paul, and I wrote to him immediately when I heard Red Lanta and said, God, send me some of your music. And he did. And he forgot to put a time signature on one of the pieces so that I thought it was a waltz, and it wasn't. Or I thought it was in the major, but it was in minor. He didn't put the B flat in there. So when the first time we went to San Francisco, Art was living there. He was still in Berkeley, and so McCandless and I stayed with him for a whole week of this time at the Great American Music Hall. Ooh, wonderful club. So we were able to do all these things and have all this influence. And so we're hearing Keith Jarrett, we're hearing Chick Corea with what was the band called?
Oh, Return for Forever, that one?
Yeah, no, before.
Oh yeah,
The trio.
The Circle Trio, yeah.
Yeah, Circle.
That was beautiful, yeah.
Right?
That was
Trio and
beautiful,
then quartet. So, I mean, Manfred was in New York to record, and Dave Holland recorded with Ann Abercrombie.
Oh yeah, I love
Recorded
John.
with Collin's record, and so we were, all these things were happening. So we were getting a hang. Chick took guitar lessons from Ralph.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, we were good friends until he died. In fact, I introduced him to the guy who turned him on to Scientology.
Oh wow.
It's my fault. I felt pretty bad about it, but that's what it was. But we were still friends, even though I was not a Scientologist. So we were in this whole swarm of everyone is playing amazing stuff.
Yeah.
And Weather Report, I hung out with Miroslav and listened. He played me before they even started. Why, he was already talking to, he and Wayne were talking together. And then they got Salamon. And once they got him, then he took over, which he always did. And it didn't work out well for Miroslav, but it wasn't really where Miroslav could go. He was a good electric player, but what they needed was, as it turned out, was the guy who, Paul Bley.
Oh yeah, on that record, yeah, exactly, 74, yeah.
Paul Bley had he had a concert. He said, "You got to come to this concert. I've hired these two kids from." And actually, he had two nights in New York, and the first night was Ross Trout played guitar.
Oh yeah.
The second night, Pat Metheny played the guitar, and both nights, Jocko played. And those guys had I don't know whether they took a plane or a train or how they got from Florida to New York to do this. But at the end of the night, I introduced myself to Jocko and said, "Well, this is fantastic." I said, "Where are you guys staying?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, come on with me." Wow. I had a room. I had a little apartment with my girlfriend and her daughter, who was 4 years old. And we just rolled out a bedroll and slept on the floor. Little girl slept in I think a baby bed. So he came and we rolled out a bed for him and slept there. So we were pretty good friends for a while. I asked him if he'd ever heard of Weather Report, and he said no.
Sure.
But at that concert, he would play at the Bley's concert. Bley would play one of his songs something by Carla, something by his wives all wrote music, or the first two wrote music for him. He'd play that, and then he'd leave it to Jocko and Adam Nussbaum and Ross the first night, and they would just take that thing and make their lunch and dinner out of it. And finally, at the Bley, after about the fourth tune, and he'd just leave the stage. He'd play the melody and a solo, and then leave the stage, and they'd do it. And he came out and said, "This is a pretty good band, If they can hear it once, then they'll make a mountain out of a molehill." So we became good friends and played a lot together. And eventually there he was with the number one most amazing
The rest is
God knows
history.
wherever
Yeah.
else. So to be around, and I played with him and Jan Hammer. We played with my friend Larry Cherish, who I made some records with.
Yeah, sure. There you know. Yeah.
We Cherish had a good piano at his place, and so we played there with Hammer, with Cherish. So, and Bill Connors, when he quit because he wouldn't join Scientology, when he quit with Chick, why he would come and hang out. We played with him too.
I love Bill, man. He's one of my favorite guitarists
great.
ever. Such a player.
One of the best sound.
Beautiful player.
Yeah, so I mean, we were in the middle of all this stuff going on, and it meant that, you know, there were dozens of people that were each playing with. Oregon didn't tour that much, but Karish and I played together a lot in New York. I played with Benny Wallace a lot. I played with a lot of people, all kinds of different situations. Everybody did. You know, we all had all these things going on. And yeah, what a deal. And eventually, when let me see, for the first record, our first record, when we were still on that first tour, when we got to LA, this is a spot I stopped at a long time back. We're playing, and Colin knows somebody in every town, it seems. So we get to LA, and he says, "Oh, I know these people here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, all the musicians assemble at this place. Here, let's go." So we go to a party, and Ralph and Colin play this guitar duet thing that they've been working at now for 50, probably 40 concerts worth into. And here are all these different musicians at this thing in these people's house. The guy who lives in it, we made a record. We left town after they'd heard this, and these people in LA got together, a bunch of people, and decided to form a production company that would bring ourselves, we're not called Oregon yet, but bring this band to town. And they would do a record of their own, a record with this girl who wrote her own folk songs, but she's from the Flying Baracini family, who are tightrope walkers in the circus, and this other person, and Cyrus Faryar, who had been a member of the modern folk quartet, and he was there, and so were the guys from other crazy bands. Anyway, so they decide we're going to come and do these 5 projects. Only 3 of them got done, but we ended up going to LA and going to this house and getting an engineer to come record us in the house we didn't have any cameras, so for the guy to see that we were ready to play or not. All these things. And all these people would stop by, and they'd come through the dining room window. You could walk into this low window. And so we met all these musicians. So we ended up, the summer after that 50 concert tour, we spent a month in LA making this record. And we met all kinds of people. And at that time, we were the only ones that finished the record. The girl with the Flying Baracina family went off and couldn't finish hers. And Cyrus finished his eventually. And it came out. I used to have a copy of it. I don't think I have it anymore. But since you can't see me, I can't show you the cover. And so things went along and went along and went along. by the, I don't know, what must have been by the time we made the fifth or sixth record, the guy who, because Colin had known Rabih initially, the man George Schutz, a New York piano player, and had originally been a radio guy in New York, and who had been a child in Vienna when Hitler was marching in. His parents managed to get on a train and get out of there and go to New York. So George was Robbie's manager, and he was a presenter in Carnegie Hall, in all the halls in New York. And the accountant was an amazing guy. We ended up finally with this, we had other people booking us for quite a while who were, kids who were in the business of doing it and would try and get us things. And all the early things with Larry Coryell's band was the guy who was booking them, and they put us on. And so finally we ended up with the guy who was booking Matheny and Keith Jarrett for a while. But Ted Curlin's agency in Boston, and Gary Burton was part of in Boston, had started the Berkeley School, and so Gary had actually talked Ted Curlin into, instead of trying to learn music, why not book it? So we ended up with the manager, the accountant, and the booking agent for the sort of all. So, I mean, we were able to do Carnegie Hall and Town Hall and this hall and that hall. We got to go to the concert that George Harrison made happen with Rabih and all this, a busload of the best musicians in India and a busload of the best cooks in India. And those two buses together did that whole thing and ended up in Madison Square Garden. We got to go there and see that. And then record the next night with Alla Raka and Shiv Kumar, one of the flute player, I think. Wow.
Insane.
Well, so, I mean, so many things. And we kept going and going. And when, let me see, by the time we finished our account, I mentioned the accountant. Our accountant was on a plane riding in first class along of the sixth record or so. That's where I left off our story. So he was sitting in a first class seat and sitting next to somebody who owned part of Warner Brothers and happened to have a CD or a cassette, and it must have been a cassette of us. And pretty soon, he wants to hear more, and he wants to hear more. And then at that point, Elektra Asylum was doing really well because of they had a rock band that was paying for everything. And so they decided to do some music for art's sake rather than just. So that's how we got picked to do. We were going to the first a 3-year contract to do 3 records. And the Vanguard deal is about over, and Manfred wants us to come and record for him.
Oh yeah, also that, yeah.
And which everybody wanted Manfred to record them, and he'd already recorded Ralph on several things, and he's off and running with solo things with the Solstice album, the most amazing with the best of the Norwegian and Swedish.
Jon on drums. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. So,
beautiful.
And Colin and with Abercrombie were different people, and he promised me that I could do a record. And so eventually, May 24th, 1976, Larry Karish and I went to record a duo record for Manfred in Europe. And we had a lot of different things worked out. We went there. Manfred used the whole record session to talk about, well, you know what Keith would have done. So we were like, Larry was very kind of shy. He would never play in the background for anything. It either made sense or it didn't. And eventually, so we made an album called May 24th, 1976, under serious duress. And the good thing that happened was that Rabih Abou Khalil, who is a great oud player, heard that record and called me and said,
I wanted to ask you how you ended up with him. Yeah, well, now you answered it. Yeah, okay. Interesting.
And so I got to do all 5 of those projects, and each one was like, spend 3 weeks learning the melodies to all the songs because there's no bass part.
And it's all odd meter, basically, right? I mean, it's constantly
everything.
Yeah.
And by that time, Glen Moore is there, Charlie Mariano is there, and a great drummer from someplace else in Lebanon or Syria, maybe. I'm not sure where he's from. But so that record got me to be able to play. Sonny Fortune eventually was the horn player on the last couple. And one was all guys from over there, violin and flutes and the others were Charlie, who was wonderful.
Yeah.
So good things. So eventually, I got to make 3 records with Glen Velez and Karish and myself, Mokave.
Yeah.
So you may have heard.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Those were wonderful albums to make and to play on, and really beautifully done. But lots of interesting things. I made a record which I don't even have a copy of it, but Jerry Granelli was a really good friend of mine, and he and I ended up doing a duo record.
Really? Oh, wow.
For a label, and it's called The Forces of Flight.
I'll have to find it. Okay.
And it exists somewhere. I've seen it on some record company somewhere has it. And there were a lot of records with other people that happened for the most part after Oregon was done. I ended up having to finally have a conflict for what would have been my 6th record with Robbie. And so Steve Swallow did that one, and he did the next 2 or 3. And I was, in retrospect, I was a little unhappy that I had so many other projects going on by that time. Once Colin died, it was just sad.
Sure.
there was no. He had a way. If there was a problem, he had a way that made it perfectly right. In fact, it made something really great happen that you weren't thinking of before. Oh, he could just solve just about anything. Just amazing. And he finally got to have his own band with, with it.
Codona, yeah.
Yeah, that was
that was beautiful. Yeah.
Such a wonderful thing. I got to hear them play several times, and it was that was what he wanted. He didn't. He wanted to be able to do stuff that really had more the history, maybe more of Don and of the Brazilian, just all the different kinds of time things that could be done with those guys. So
yeah.
So thereafter, for all of us, it was we had a good run with Treelock, but it was all there's nobody like Colin. It
was different. Yeah, it was different. Yeah.
No matter what, Treelock is amazing, and we did some nice things. There's just a thing now that's supposed to come out from 1990.
Really? How well?
I know one that actually, a year ago, they contacted me, and I think it was done then. I'm still waiting for the money to come. But we did the thing. Oregon was helped by many things. One of the main things was that when we started playing, the major newspapers in all the free world had great music writers who wrote for that was such a rich period in music from 67 to 84. That time, all the papers had, well, not until 84, because I think once Reagan came in, I felt like it began diminishing. The arts weren't paid so much attention to anymore. But at least from 67 to 81 or 2 in there was, because 80 is when the CD came out.
Yeah.
And that kind of crushed everything, because we were still going in the studio and making records for the time for a relative bargain price of hurrying up and getting it done maybe in a week or two and mixing it. And a record could cost, $30,000. And once the CDs came and the money started going elsewhere, away from the big companies, and once George Winston became, and that label, people started, recording live only, or not with necessarily a budget for it to be a big event. So once that started happening, everything began to sort of go down. I mean, to the place where now, that what is it? Who's the young lady who writes so much of the good music, and she does it in her bedroom on a cassette or something, and now it's turned in, pop music is turned into something else, and our concerts in Europe, once the wall went down in Berlin, once 89, that was sort of the end of big budgets in Europe.
Yeah.
and so I would say that for the most part, we had, there were some good things done. We worked after when Treelock finally got hired by Stolen by by John. Ralph called it too. Ralph said, "I saw how he looked. He came to see us in Paris. John came. He said, I saw how he looked at Treelock. He said, he's going to take him." And within a year,
Yeah.
he was gone, and we could only have Treelock for the month of February for a year. Finally, it came down to that. And so, eventually we took a few gigs as a trio, and then people loved the music. It sounded good.
Yeah.
It was still that unique sound, but without calling. So that worked for a minute. But then once Vera Brandes wanted to hear us with drums again, so she wanted to know if it could be. She wanted Airto, which
Wow.
would have been fine. We
That
certainly could
would
have
have been
done something
interesting.
with him.
Yeah.
And we tried playing with Glen Moore, and it was interesting with anyone we did it with. But once I think playing as a trio, we ended up putting a lot more pressure. Ralph and Paul really felt the pressure of it, of not having the time somehow to be there
Yep.
miraculously, either with Treelock but most of all with Colin. So when we met Mark Walker, why Paul really liked Mark's playing. He'd done a record with him and wanted to work with him, and he was just lobbying heavy for it, that we go with him. So we did a tour with him, and I was not a fan, but we ended up, it was, everybody had a vote, and I didn't win that one. So the rest of it was hard.
Yeah.
Hard to do. And by the time in 1980, we took a break in 81 because Colin and Lanny were pregnant. Colin wanted to take a year off and prepare for a baby to come and have some time home after the baby came. And so when we did that, by this time, there are no longer people writing about what we're doing for a book somewhere. Somebody said, "Oh yeah, and this band is playing," instead of a whole like Gorgio, so strike up the band kind of thing. So we began. The newspapers stopped paying for these experts to write and started just taking the money for a little ad, and that was it.
Yep.
So we had done so well with having great writers just love what we were up to, and so we got a tremendous amount of attention that way, and a tremendous amount of help from having the Electro Records come out, being able to do Carnegie Hall, and play these wonderful places. So by that, in the sort of run before Mark was even there, it was just getting hard to do it, and everybody was looking for other projects, and I was doing Macave, and I did the Nancy King records. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. I know. Yeah. It's completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole. Are you familiar with those three albums?
I have. I think I've one. I've heard one.
All three are worth having.
Oh, okay.
My we're I actually right now I'm talking to Origin Records about bringing them out. He wants to bring them out,
Oh, fantastic. Super.
and one way or another it'll happen. The contract for those things is deadly, but we'll figure it out one way or another to have it work because it's for me it's some of the best things that I ever did. And
Okay.
Samantha, my wife, wrote like 15 of the songs that we did there, and it's spectacular. Nancy's a fabulous singer. She's still alive,
Mm.
and but yeah,
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, you guys left such a legacy. I think it's important.
yeah.
This
It's
is yeah.
we were just fortunate in every way. I mean, for somebody to do what my life had ended up being just by going to New York when I did,
Hmm.
having somebody take me by the arm and pull me in the direction of Paul Bley's house, and then being able to, and on that one of the gigs that I did with Jimmy Stevenson, that guy McLaughlin came and played.
Oh
He
wow,
never
really?
even he never even listened to the music. He just came and took off with it, and I mean, there was just so much going on. It was so strong. The Brecker brothers were.
Oh yeah.
We would hang out and play Bill Evans. We were all like good friends, really
Mm.
good friends. It's a very fortunate time for them.
Yeah.
And by the time 95, by the time Clinton was president, he gave away the publishing to Spotify and Apple Music. And
Yeah.
so any money that would come to us disappeared.
Yeah. No, it's almost like a hobby nowadays. Being
Yeah, it
really
is.
a musician. It's really like.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have friends. You know Dan Tepfer?
Oh sure, we're friends. Yeah, the piano player. Yeah.
Yeah, you know him. His grandfather was teaching English at the University of Oregon when Ralph and I were there.
Mm.
He was a great jazz bebopper. He knew all the lingo of the of that time. He was in the war and then lived in New York for a while afterwards. Went to school, and his son, his wife was the daughter of this man who was Chuck Gruff was his name. His daughter, Ralph and I played for the wedding of his daughter and a scientist, and they mated and they made a son, Dan Tepfer, who is like just absolutely. Have you heard the recording that he did of Bach's?
Oh yeah, variations. Yeah, sure. Of course, I have it.
And then his own variations.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man.
Improvised.
Yeah, fantastic.
So his mom, she died in an accident riding a bicycle in Switzerland and was hit by a car and killed. But when she was still alive, when Dan was just graduating from the New England Conservatory, and he got the Thelonious Monk Award and doing all these things. She had Nancy King, the singer, and Ralph and I come to Paris and play with Dan. Or that was his coming out party with old friends from Eugene, Oregon, where they'd all grown up. So, But I mean, the way he thinks of records, the way that record was recorded with those things, he just went to Busendorfer's basement
Yeah.
and
Yep.
did it on his tape machine.
Yep.
And he's written, because his dad was a scientist, he's been writing apps for
Yeah.
all
That's
these
how,
things.
yeah.
Absolutely. The music, turn it upside down. But I mean, all these, so ingenious. So, with young people like that, I think that the period that we lived in, that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, was a gorgioso period. Listen to any of the pop music from that time. It's
Yeah.
amazing. All of it. I mean, and you don't have to be a jazz musician to love it. It's all kinds of things. And, it had been going on since the 30s. I mean, that was such a long period
Yep.
for high art, which that was the George Gershwins and everybody else,
Yeah.
that eventually just went away. And now we have
Oh, now it's crazy. Yeah.
now it's
Yeah.
all kinds of things are happening, but the world has just gone on its nose.
Yeah.
And but Oregon could have happened at all with all the little chance things that made it so there's a record here and a record there and something else, and that I could get with Rabih and make those records.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was really something. And Glenn Velez.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, all these guys. Yeah.
Just so many people, so many influences taken from different cultures without, stiffing them or something. Just chances for amazing things to go on.
True.
I mean,
Yep.
when we played as a trio, Ralph didn't want to take this gig. We had a gig we'd worked one gig in Mexico as a quartet. And so we were invited back some years later after Colin had died, and they called and asked if we could play as a trio. And I had to go on the road, and they ended up calling back at my house, and my wife, we had a 4-year-old at the time, and she's staying home, taking construction jobs and learning to drive heavy road equipment, because I'm making no money. It's just everything's gone kind of. So they called and said, can we confirm this date, this trio date? And my wife says, yes, you can. And when Ralph heard this, he called and just gave her hell. Why are you answering your own phone? Well, how can you? He said, come on. You guys aren't working. You're not. This is a real concert.
Mm.
So we ended up going there and playing as a trio. There's so many people. People are sitting on the stage and behind us and around us and all over. They hire us back the next night for a full fee again.
Oh, wow.
Play 2 nights, yeah, because it was just incredible. So, I mean, we were still carrying the possibility of it, that we started with, which was that everybody could hear everybody else, and we could do anything, and we could each hear that, and it meant that anything you did affected what happened.
Mm.
There's a rhythm section and there's a soloist. No, there's all this stuff going on all the time.
Yeah.
And this is, only the very best music even begins to have that feeling. So that's what we were able to do.
True.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, I mean,
Amazing.
we got to do it.
Sorry?
And
Yeah.
no, I don't know. So I don't know. Are there other things that?
No, I mean, you went now. So it was such a nice impro. Now, I
Yeah.
don't even want to ask more questions because it was like, it's
Well,
like you played the last note beautifully. So it's for me that really, I was like, let's do an encore now. Let's. But thanks so much, Glenn, for sharing these thoughts.
Oh,
You know,
oh, you bet.
it's
And listen, if send me your mailing address and
I will.
everything, and when I get like there's this record from 1990 supposed to come out with Treelock,
Oh, please.
and I can send you that, but I can send when the Nancy King things happen.
Oh, please, I would love to hear those. Yeah, I just heard that one and would be beautiful. Yeah. And if you're ever in Europe still, if you're coming, you know, you can come here. We have a guest room here in Slovenia. So, Maribor, if you're ever around, let me know, you know.
So you're in the city?
No, I live like, you know where Graz is in Austria?
Yes.
I'm like
Yes.
30 minutes south of Graz, between Zagreb and Graz, kind of. Did you get the idea?
Oh yeah, Graz. Yeah, I went there. There was a guy. There was a bass player from there.
Wayne Darling, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who had a connection with Tomastic, the string maker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
From Vienna, and so I went there and played. I did some things with him, and actually Nancy King and I played there. But Jim Pepper came, kind of messed up and screwed up this concert in Oxford. I didn't even mention him.
Oh, yeah, that's probably a whole different story, right, Jim? Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
he was a
Well,
monster.
that's another story.
He was a monster.
That's from earlier. I met him when I was a freshman in high school.
Wow.
We played in a band called the Young Oregonians for the Oregonian newspaper. That's the encore. I have a record. I have a tape. I can send it to you. I can send you.
I'd love to hear it. I mean, I love Jim, you know. I've played quite a lot with Bob Moses the last 3 years. So he told me stories about Jim, and they played a lot together.
Yeah, he was part of that.
Yeah.
Part of that whole thing.
Yeah. Amazing.
He was amazing.
Amazing guy, yeah.
Pepper was spectacular. And we were in the same town, we grew up together. And I was there. We had rehearsed with him to do a gig, and he couldn't do it. And he died in the next day or two.
Oh, shit, yeah.
And it was
another one of those sad moments, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, he had a hell of a life.
Oh.
And he did some just great things.
Great music, yeah. He left behind.
Yeah.
For sure.
All these wonderful people. Well, so we can only thank the Austrians and the Germans, you know, for what we were able to do. Because when I started, whenever we played in Europe, the reason it really worked in Europe was that because of the Marshall Plan, all the 18 radio stations in Germany and however many in Austria, all these things were set up beautifully to be a recording studio, orchestra, choral, everything. It was like the center of all of the arts after so long. And when we went, the very first time that Oregon played, we played only in 72 or 73. It was just in little tiny coffee house the size of my studio here. It's 12 by 14. It's just a little place, and we played. But somebody came from the radio station with the recorder. It wasn't a portable unit. They just unplugged it and brought it and sat with a mic in front of us. So we played in these little tiny concert halls where still there was a piano that we couldn't use because this is the best one that they say. So we'd use the other one. That's fine because they were all good. It was just they give people a choice. So I think 9 of the 12 concerts were recorded. And then for the next 2 years, those radio stations in Austria, in Germany, in Paris, in Spain, in Copenhagen, they played those concerts that they'd recorded. Yeah. And each one is recorded practically as great as any of our records were made. I mean, if we listen back, we was like, oh, raise this a little bit, but nothing really. So when we came back, we had big halls because the guy who was writing for the newspaper knew he'd been listening to these things on the radio. Now he gets to hear them. He's so excited. So people showed up everywhere, right until the very last Berlin concert before Colin died. There was an audience that came ready to be just blown away. Yeah. It really worked the way, and there was nothing like that in the States. There was always, of course, a college radio station.
Yeah, that's a different story.
Which the sound goes clear to the other side of this hill here. It goes out a little bit, and maybe somebody has heard something about, I don't know, but nothing. So when we played in Eastern Hungary, the last time we were in Europe, we ended up doing all the Eastern states that had been behind the curtain.
Yep.
And they didn't, people came from Russia. They came and they were like just crazy for it. I mean, it was, and then eventually we got to go there and make a record and everything.
In Moscow, yeah, sure. Yeah. That's a beautiful one,
yeah. Yeah, that's good.
That's a masterpiece.
Yeah, anyway, were it not for Europe, we would not be so well known,
Yeah.
If Manfred hadn't decided to do what he did, and everyone else, Keith and everybody.
Yeah.
That's great. I thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Glenn, thank you. Thanks for finding the time and sharing some of this, man. And like I said, if you're ever in Europe, just let me know. And
yes, give me all your coordinates.
I'll send you everything by email now, and
sure.
And hopefully we get together for a glass of wine or something. So
yeah, okay.
Would be beautiful.
Thanks again.
You too. Thanks so much, Glenn.
Okay.
Stay strong.